I first read Attar of Nisapur's Conference of the Birds when I was 18 years old. I was at the now defunct Body Tree bookstore in West Hollywood when, looking through the Sufi section, I noticed Charles Stanley Knott's English translation of the famous Persian poem. I was immediately enchanted with the mystical journey of a flock of birds in search of the legendary Simurgh. In this quest for true enlightenment, Attar was providing us with a rich metaphor by which to view our sojourn for enlightenment. The Conference of the Birds is a perfect talisman by which to understand the rich spirituality of Sufism. The following book is a chapter from Claude Field's remarkable Mystics and Saints of Islam, which was first published in 1910. Previously we published his excerpt on the life and work of Mullah Shah, the sage who taught both Prince Dara Shikoh and Princess Jahanara in the 17th century. One day while he was seated in his shop surrounded by servants busily attending to his orders, a wandering dervish paused at the door and regarded him silently, while his eyes slowly filled with tears. Attar sharply told him to be off about his business. "That is easily done," replied the dervish. "I have only a light bundle to carry, nothing in fact but my clothes. But you with your sacks full of valuable drugs, when the time comes to go, what will you do? Had you not better consider a little?" The appeal went home. He promptly abandoned his business in order to devote himself to a religious life. Bidding a decisive adieu to the world, he betook himself to a Sufi convent, presided over by Sheikh Runuddin. Here he resided for some time engaged in devotional practices, and then made the pilgrimage to Mecca, where he met with many devotees and conceived the idea of compiling a collection of stories of the holy men of Islam. To this work he devoted several years of his long life. He also composed a Pandnama or Book of Counsels. But the work by which he is chiefly known is the Mantiqua or Parliament of Birds, and of this we proceed to give some account. In this allegorical poem, various birds representing mystics unite themselves under the leadership of the hoopoe in order to journey to the court of the Simurgh, a mysterious bird whose name signifies 30 birds, dwelling in Mount Kaf, the mountain which encircles the world. At the commencement of the poem there is a long debate between the hoopoe and the other birds, who at first allege various excuses for not undertaking the journey, while he rebukes them for their lukewarmness, not concealing the fact that the journey is full of peril, and that though many start few will reach the goal. The hoopoe's description of the road is as follows: "We have 7 valleys to traverse. The first is the Valley of Search, the second the Valley of Love, which has no limits, the third is the Valley of Knowledge, the fourth is the Valley of Independence, the fifth is the Valley of Unity, pure and simple, the sixth is the Valley of Amazement, last of all is the Valley of Poverty and Annihilation, beyond which there is no advance. There thou wilt feel thyself drawn, but will have no power to go any further. 1. When thou enterest the Valley of Search, at every step new trials will present themselves, there the parrot of the celestial sphere is as mute as a fly. There thou must cast away all thy possessions and imperil all thy riches. Not only must the hand be empty, but thy heart must be detached from all that is earthly. Then the light of the divine essence will begin to cast upon thee some rays. 2. In order to enter the second valley, of love, thou must be made all of fire. He who is not composed of fire will find no pleasure in that valley. He must not think of the future, but be ready to sacrifice 100 worlds to the flames, if needs be. Faith and infidelity, good and evil, religion and irreligion, are all one for him who has arrived at the second stage, for where love reigns, none of them exist anymore. 3. In the third valley, of knowledge, the progress of the pilgrims is in proportion to their innate powers. In the path traversed by Abraham the friend of God, can a feeble spider keep pace with an elephant? Let the gnat fly as hard as he may, he will never keep up with the wind. Thus the degrees of knowledge attained to by the initiated are different. One only reaches the entrance of the temple, while another finds the divinity who dwells in it. When the sun of knowledge darts its rays, each is illumined in proportion to his capacity, and finds in the contemplation of the truth the rank which belongs to him. He sees a path lie open before him through the midst of the fire. The furnace of the world becomes for him a garden of roses. He perceives the almond within the shell, that is to say, he sees God under the veil of all apparent things. But for one happy man who penetrates into these mysteries, how many millions have gone astray? Only the perfect can dive with success into the depths of this ocean. 4. In the fourth valley, of independence, thou hast done with everything but God. Out of this disposition of mind, which no longer feels the need of anything, there rises a tempestuous hurricane, every blast of which annihilates whole kingdoms. The 7 seas are then no more than a pool of water, the 7 planets are a spark, the 8 paradises are only a single curtain, the 7 hells a mass of ice. In less time than it takes the greedy crow to fill its crop, out of 100 caravans of travelers there remains not one alive. 5. The valley of unity which succeeds to that of independence, is the valley of privation of all things and reduction to unity, that is to say, the attainment of a degree of spirituality, in which the divine essence, apart from every attribute, is the object of contemplation. 6. In the sixth valley, that of amazement, the pilgrim's lot is to suffer and to groan, each breath he draws is like a sword, his days and nights are passed in sighs, from each of his hairs distills a drop of blood, which, as it falls, traces in the air the letters of the word alas. There he remains in a state of stupefaction, and finds his way no more. To make the meaning of amazement clearer, Attar gives the following allegory. He supposes that the young companions of a princess wished one day to amuse themselves at the expense of a slave. They made him drink wine in which they had dropped a narcotic drug, and when he was asleep had him carried 127 to the harem. At midnight, when he woke, he found himself on a gilded couch surrounded by perfumed candles, scent boxes of aloes, and lovely women whose songs ravished his ear. Disconcerted and stupefied, says the poet, he no longer retained reason nor life. He was no longer in this world, nor was he in the other. His heart was full of love for the princess, but his tongue remained mute. His spirit was in ecstasies. When he awoke in the morning he found himself again a slave at his old post. The memory of the past night was so vivid that it caused him to utter a cry. He tore his garments, and threw dust upon his head. They asked him what was the matter, but he knew not what to reply. He could not say whether what he had seen was a dream or a reality, whether he had passed the night in drunkenness or in full possession of his faculties. What he had seen had left a profound impression on his mind, and yet he could not trace it out accurately. He had contemplated beauty beyond all words, and yet he was not sure whether he had seen it after all. The only effect of his vision was a trouble of mind and uncertainty. 7. At last comes the seventh valley, that of poverty and annihilation. But these words are insufficient to describe it: forgetfulness, deafness, dumbness, fainting, such is the condition of the pilgrim in this valley. One sun causes millions of shadows to vanish. When the ocean is agitated, how can the figures traced on its waters remain? Such figures are this world and the world to come, and he who knows them to be nothing is right. He who is plunged in this sea, where the heart is astray and lost, has by means of his very annihilation found immutable repose. In this ocean, where reigns a constant calm, the heart finds naught but annihilation. Attar also illustrates the Sufi doctrine of annihilation, which resembles the Buddhistic nirvana, by an allegory. One night, he says, the butterflies were tormented by the desire to unite themselves with the candle flame. They held a meeting, and resolved that one of them should go and experiment, and bring back news. A butterfly was sent to a neighboring house, and he perceived the flame of the candle which was burning within. He brought back word and tried to describe the flame according to the measure of his intelligence, but the butterfly who presided over the assembly said that the exploring butterfly had attained no real knowledge of the candle flame. A second butterfly went forth, and approached so close to the flame as to singe his wings. He also returned, and threw a little light on the mystery of union with the flame. But the presiding butterfly found his explanation not much more satisfactory than the preceding one. A third butterfly then flew forth. He was intoxicated with love for the flame, and flung himself wholly into it. He lost himself, and identified himself with it. It embraced him completely, and his body became as fiery red as the flame itself. When the presiding butterfly saw from afar that the flame had absorbed the devoted butterfly and communicated its own qualities to it, that butterfly, he exclaimed, has learnt what he wished to know, but he alone understands it. Only he who has lost all trace and token of his own existence knows what annihilation is. Until thou ignorest thyself, body and soul, thou canst not know the object which deserves thy love. The foregoing terrible description of the 7 mysterious valleys was well calculated to discourage the birds, and Attar tells us that after hearing it they stood with hearts oppressed and heads bent. All understood, he says, that it was not for a feeble hand to bend this bow. They were so terrified by the discourse of the hoopoe that a great number died on the spot where they were assembled. As to the others, in spite of their dismay, they consented to commence the journey. During long years they travelled over hill and dale, and spent a great part of their lives in pilgrimage. Finally, of all who set out, a very small band arrived at the goal. Some were drowned in the ocean, others were annihilated and disappeared. Others perished on the peaks of high mountains, devoured by thirst and a prey to all kinds of ills. 48 Others had their plumes burnt and their hearts dried up by the scorching heat of the sun. Others fell a prey to the wild beasts which haunted the road, falling panic-struck, without resistance, into their claws. Others died of sheer exhaustion in the desert. Others fought and killed each other madly for chance grains of corn. Others experienced all kinds of pains and fatigues, and ended by stopping short of the goal. Others, engrossed in curiosity and pleasure, perished without thinking of the object for which they had set out. When they started, their numbers were countless, but at last only 30 arrived, and these without feathers and wings, exhausted and prostrated, their hearts broken, their souls fainting, their bodies worn out by fatigue. They had arrived at the palace of the Simurgh. A chamberlain of the king, who saw these 30 hapless birds without feathers or wings, questioned them whence they came, and why. "We have come," they answered, "that the Simurgh may become our king. The love that we feel for him has unsettled our reason. We have denied ourselves all rest to follow the road that leads to him. It is very long since we started, and of our many millions, only 30 have reached the goal. The hope of appearing here has buoyed us up hitherto. May the king think kindly of the perils we have undergone, and cast upon us at least a glance of compassion." The chamberlain returned a harsh answer, and ordered them to go back, telling them that the king had no need of their homage. This answer at first cast them into despair, but afterwards, imitating the moth which seeks certain death in the flame of the lamp, they persisted in their request to be admitted to the presence of the Simurgh. Their steadfastness did not remain unrewarded. The Chamberlain of Grace came out, opened a door, and presented them with a document which he ordered them to read. This contained a list of all the sins which the birds had committed against the Simurgh. The perusal of it caused them nothing less than death, but this death was for them the birth into a new life. Atar says, by reason of the shame and confusion which these birds experienced, their bodies became dust, and their souls were annihilated. When they were entirely purified from all earthly elements, they all received a new life. All that they had done or omitted to do during their earthly existence passed entirely out of mind. The sun of proximity burnt them, that is to say, their former existence was consumed by the sun of the divine essence which they had approached, and a ray of this light produced a life which animated them all. At this moment they beheld themselves reflected in the Simurgh. When they stole a glance at him, he appeared to be the 30 birds themselves. When they looked at themselves, they seemed to be the Simurgh, and when they looked at both together, only one Simurgh appeared. The situation was inexpressible in words. They were all submerged in an ocean of stupefaction, with all faculties of thought suspended. Without moving a tongue, they interrogated the awful presence for an explanation of the mystery of apparent identity between the divinity and his adorers. Then a voice was heard saying, "The majesty of the Simurgh is a sun-resembling mirror. Whosoever contemplates him beholds his own reflection. Body and soul see in him body and soul. As you are 30 birds, you appear in this mirror as 30 birds. If 40 or 50 birds came here, they would see 40 or 50. Although you have passed through many changes, it is yourselves only whom you have seen throughout. Can the eye of an ant reach the Pleiades? Then how can your inch of inkling attain to us? In all the valleys which you have traversed, in all the acts of kindness which you have done to others, it was by our impulse alone that you were acting. All this while you have been asleep in the valley of the essence and the attributes. You 30 birds have been unconscious hitherto. The name 30 birds belongs rather to us, who are the veritable Simurgh. Find then in us a glorious self-effacement, in order to find yourselves again in us. So they vanished in him forever, as the shadow disappears in the sun. While on pilgrimage they conversed, when they had arrived, all converse ceased. There was no longer a guide, there were no longer pilgrims, the road itself had ceased to be.